Narratives, stories, and telling them compellingly is perhaps the defining issue of counter-extremism. Narratives and communications come in many different shapes and forms, but are always instrumental in driving forward ideas, both positive and negative. For us to protect our loved ones, we have to counter extremist propaganda, offer an alternative, and sustain our engagement. The methods of recruitment deployed by extremist groups continue to evolve and adapt. Every day that goes by without a strong counter-narrative is another day we risk losing more of our families. Hi, my name's Jonathan, and in this session we'll look at how we can constructively engage, communicate and inspire people away from extremism through narratives. Before we look at the ins and outs of how to run a campaign and directly challenge extremists both online and offline, we need to understand several things. Firstly, counter-narratives require planning. Who is your audience? What is your message? What medium are you going to use? Who will be the messenger? These four fundamental questions have to be asked at the beginning of the process and then stuck to. For all of our energies and knowledge, we have to make sure we are communicating to the right target audience, with the right message and with the right amount of resources. If we don't, we simply won't be able to inspire the kind of behavioural change that we are all working towards. Before we delve into the exact planning process of a campaign, we also need to understand exactly what sort of narrative we are offering and what we are countering. So what do we mean by a counter-narrative? Well, countering a narrative means attempting to directly deconstruct, discredit and demystify extremist messaging. And how do we do that? Well, by challenging their ideologies through emotion, theology, humour, the exposure of hypocrisy, lies and untruths. So, there are a great variety of approaches that we can all deploy to emotionally engage our audience. However, ask yourself, is your target audience going to be engaged by one of those techniques? Is simply countering a narrative enough by itself? We don't think so. So that's where we have the twin of the counter-narrative and the alternative narrative. An alternative narrative aims to undercut extremist narratives by focusing on what we are for rather than what we are against. This could come through the telling of a positive story about social values, for example, or the idea of community strength, or families. Extremists also deploy counter-narratives and alternative narratives and have done so with chilling results. Much of this comes down to their ability to offer these narratives to highly localised and varied audiences. So though they may be offering a counter-narrative, for example, the West is at war with Islam or Islam is at war with Western values, they do so in a highly targeted way. We call this target audience analysis, or segmentation. I'll give you an example. At the height of ISIS's propaganda war, many Western audiences believed that nearly 100% of ISIS's narrative was focused on violence or brutality. In fact, over 50%, according to our research, was focused on a narrative of utopia and state building. Why were so many not seeing this? Because they weren't the target audience. ISIS was directing a communications campaign involving counter-narratives and alternative narratives across a great range of subjects and mediums. Brutality, war, mercy, victimhood, belonging, utopianism, they were all part of the multiple narratives that they were telling, simultaneously to a global audience. ISIS's success in this can be reflected in the diversity of people they convinced to believe and follow these narratives. So target audience analysis and the identification of which narrative to deliver is absolutely essential. So you need to remember A and then the 4 M's: audience, message, messenger, medium and measurability. How do we define our target audience then? Firstly, we need to think about where on the vulnerability and prevention framework we are operating. This could be upstream, such as an alternative narrative aimed at inspiring young people to engage with different faith groups, or a downstream counter-narrative, such as trying to show the realities that lie behind extremist groups. Once you've made this decision, you can begin to hone in on who your audience are and set an objective. Setting a clear and measurable objective is also important in the process of defining your audience. The target audience should govern the message and medium, not the other way around, which is something quite common in some CVE messaging. So we have to be very specific about our objective and then stick to this vigorously. For example, setting an objective of countering extremism in my hometown sounds great on the surface, but may not actually yield the results we want. Changing this to increasing the number of young people visiting a youth centre so that they can meet new peers and reduce their vulnerability to radicalisation is perhaps more realistic, real-world and measurable. For more information on how to define your target audience, take a look at the Institute of Strategic Dialogue's report on target audience analysis. Here you can learn in greater detail about how to identify and define your audience. So, you've defined your audience now, and you have your objective, but you've still got a mountain to climb before you can start your campaign. In part 2 of this module, we're going to look at message, messenger, and medium. But before we leave this chapter, we want you to learn and remember a very neat formula that can help you plan your campaign. That formula is SMART. SMART is an easy way to keep track of what you need to set in place before you delve into the creative and technical side of delivery. So learn this, stick it on a wall and stick to it. Let's go through SMART now. We have S for specific. When defining your audience and objective, be clear, concise and specific about what you want to do. For example, engage youth between 16 to 24 years old to be resilient to extremist messaging by delivering an online digital training package. We'll do this by developing an online toolkit and launching a short video on social media. That's this campaign. The M in SMART is measurable. If you can't measure it, you can't improve it nor manage it. It's so important you look at how well your campaign is going and whether it's reaching your target audience. It's fine to adapt and change, but don't ignore this. So by looking at how many young people are downloading our toolkit and by measuring their social media reaction to our campaign video, we can identify how successful the campaign has been. The A in SMART is for attainable. Rome wasn't built in a day. Don't bite off more than you can chew. To have real-world success and proper behavioural change, we need to set an attainable target. We want 1,000 YouTube views and 30 downloads of our toolkit. The R in SMART is for relevant. When you define and then target your audience, it's important that your message is relevant to them. You wouldn't market shampoo to bald people, so don't do something similar in counter-extremism. The gold standard is for the audience to see their own lives and emotions reflected in the communications being directed at them. So we'll run a video which depicts school life and shows key landmarks in their city to remind them of their community. Might be a good approach. And finally, the T of SMART stands for time-based. The best campaigns aim for a specific target audience and put a time cap on this. You can't campaign forever and without a clear direction. So set aside some time that you can dedicate yourself to this task. So for example, the campaign will run for 3 weeks with the video being released on week 1 and the toolkit being released on week 2. So there you have it, a SMART communications plan. For some examples of counter-narrative campaigns, take a look at the resources below and the Fate social media page. This brings us to the close of part 1, but remember SMART and keep it in the back of your mind when we move on to part 2. This is where we really roll up our sleeves and look at the tactical side of delivering an effective counter-narrative. We've developed a simple, easy-to-use playbook which has been designed specifically for the Fate membership. So click on the links below to continue your training with Fate. To finish, here's a top tip. Going viral should not be the aim. Going viral implies untargeted and unpredictable. By contrast, successful counter-narratives may be highly targeted to specific audiences and platforms.